Welcome to our September edition of Voices for the West, which is a repurposing, a reimagining of social distancing hour. We are trying to move ourselves out of the social distance reality and into something different. Wishful thinking. So we've rebranded a little bit, and we're really grateful to have you with us this evening. We are joined tonight by Danielle Murray of Conservation Lands Foundation as our special guest, and our facilitator this evening will be Advocates for the West Senior Attorney Todd View. And I will let Todd introduce Danielle and Conservation Lands Foundation a bit more formally, and we will get to that. I'll do just a little bit of housekeeping here. All of our guests, you this evening are on mute. Oh, by the way, my name is Amy Moran, and I am the Deputy Director here at Advocates for the West. And our guests this evening are on mute, but we welcome your questions. We hope that this will be a participatory experience, and we'll have some good dialogue. So if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A section. That's what you see along the bottom of your screen, Q&A. Todd will be monitoring that and making sure that we are able to ask questions that arise. We plan to hold the questions until the final 15 minutes of our evening, but if something really good and pertinent pops up, by all means, we'll break the rules and have questions come a little bit earlier. I would draw your attention to our next Voices for the West in October. We will be joined by author Betsy Quammen, and she'll be talking about her newest book on the radicalization of the American West. The date and the details on that are still forthcoming, so stay tuned on that. We'll have more to come. And I will just leave with a dedication to our good friend and colleague, Anna Dimitriades, who normally would be hosting this evening, but she is in Athens, Greece, and in fact has accepted a new job and is heading off from Advocates for the West after 9 years of amazing service. And her last day with us will be November 1st. She's in Greece right now doing a little bit of orientation, but I will do my best to represent Advocates for the West as fully as she does so well each month for these events. But we thank Anna for all that she has done and wish her so much success and joy in her next endeavor. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Todd. Oh, and I will also put myself on mute and cut my camera and make you the facilitator, Todd.
All right. Well, cutting your camera means that I will be larger on everybody's screen, which is slightly frightening, but I will hope that you all can get over that. My name's Todd View. You all probably know me, or many of you know me. It's good to see your names, and hopefully you're smiling at me. Advocates for the West. We are a public interest environmental law firm dedicated to protecting the public lands and natural treasures and wildlife of the American West. And we do that, and we have been doing that for 20 years, almost 20 years, by trying to inject sound science into the agency decision-making process and figuring out ways to let this science inform our advocacy, both in court and before we get into court through administrative processes. Now, I'll just start by acknowledging, as I do with most of the meetings that I have these days, that this is a very different conversation and presentation than we would have had if the November 2020 election had gone the other way. So instead of engaging exclusively in a defensive crouch and trying to beat back one ill-conceived decision, Trump decision after another, which, by the way, we're still doing, this presentation by Danielle is forward-looking, which makes it really exciting for me and for us. And the questions here and the issues here revolve around how can we help President Biden fulfill his pledge to protect 30% of Americans' public lands and waters by 2020. And part of this, achieving this goal, is going to require that we, the advocates, not just Advocates for the West, but the entire environmental community, have a more firm grasp on the values of the public lands and national forests in mitigating impacts to climate change and building resiliency into local communities and wildlands, and stemming the loss in biodiversity and wildlife across the public lands. And so that's why we're here today, to kind of forward looking, how are we trying to fulfill our mission by allowing and injecting sound scientific principles to inform our advocacy. So this is going to be a pretty fun program. I've seen a bit of it. Danielle Murray of the Conservation Lands Foundation is here to discuss Conservation Lands Foundation's climate mapping project. Now, for those that don't know, Conservation Lands Foundation is I believe the one, oh, I think I'm frozen, the one and only national conservation organization exclusively focused on protecting, restoring, and expanding national conservation lands. And in addition to having a dynamic and proven leadership and staff, CLF leads a nationwide movement of grassroots advocates and organizations that they call their friends groups. I think it's numbering about 80 groups that are sprinkled across the American West that are there in place, protecting lands and landscapes that they know and that they love. Advocates for the West continues to do a lot of work with Conservation Lands Foundation. It's one of our most important and cherished partners that we've developed, and partnerships that we've developed over the last 5 years. And we're also working with friends groups all over the American West, and some of the folks are on this call. Now, Danielle Murray is the Senior Legal Director and Legal and Policy Director of CLF. I think she's been there since the beginning, or very close to the beginning, right around 2008. Danielle hails from the great state of Delaware with an undergrad degree in wildlife conservation. She has a law degree from Vermont Law School. She is, as you will find out in a moment, the powerhouse behind many of CLF's and Friends campaigns to protect, restore, and expand national conservation lands. And I believe and trust that Danielle imagined, designed, and created the climate mapping project, although I don't know that she coded. She might have coded it, but I don't think so. So without further ado, I look forward to this. I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as I do. Danielle, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Todd, for that introduction. And we're just going to jump right in, because I know it's 6 o'clock. Everyone has their beverage and are eager to hear about the Climate Atlas. So I'm just going to start with this image. I like this. This is of my son, so obviously I think he's pretty cute. The other thing is he is in Bryce Canyon National Park, and behind him is Grand Staircase Escalante. And just to show that ecosystems don't really follow the lines that we do, we really need to break down the science if we are going to protect public lands for 30 by 30 to mitigate climate and to protect biodiversity. So what did the Climate Atlas, why did we start the Climate Atlas? This is about 1.5 years ago, and in talking to some friends and partners about 30 by 30, Trump was in office. You know, if we had a progressive, environmentally focused president, climate and biodiversity were going to be the key factors in protecting public land. And we really didn't have a great set of maps that were public, that were easy to use, that were accessible for folks like the Friends Grassroots Network, where they could find that information to help them be better advocates. So what we wanted to create was kind of a first of its kind, free, publicly available map of America's public lands. And we focused on the Forest Service and BLM mainly because we feel like that's the biggest opportunity in the US to advance 30 by 30 and to protect lands for biodiversity. There's a lot of studies out there that show we can't get to 30 by 30 without a significant increase in conservation on our Forest Service and BLM public lands. And then just to kind of echo what Todd said about this was something that I kind of pulled partners in, and it's not just a CLF project. It's a project that we want everyone to be able to use and to benefit all kind of conservation campaigns. And just notably here that we did hire conservation science partners. I did not code the project myself. Law school did not prepare me for that. But some of our initial funding came from the Campion Foundation, which the visionary there was Neil Cornsey, former BLM director, and the Audubon Society when Nada Culver was senior policy director there. So some some of the visionaries behind this project from the beginning were folks that really know the need and impact for some of this information. And again, we weren't looking to pick the 10 best landscapes. We were looking to provide information so every single campaign can be elevated. And so what is exactly in this kind of web app? And the goal was to take the best available data. We didn't want to recreate data. We wanted to take the best information out there, and we wanted to put it in a form that was usable. We also wanted to take that kind of carbon, climate data and species data and kind of add it up into a single conservation value. So you can see here the 6 data sets that are part of this atlas: total carbon, climate resilience, climate stability, and then we have ecological intactness, ecological connectivity, and species richness. So those are kind of the data sets. You will see they're all kind of added up into a single conservation value, which is our composite index. And then if you really just care about carbon and climate, we can look at just the carbon and climate layers as an index, and also the biodiversity layers as an index. This is a lot of information. I'll show you on the actual web app in a minute. And also, as part of this project, we are creating a kind of front landing page with user vignettes and case studies to help explain some of this information and make it accessible for a user, a decision maker that doesn't have, an in-depth science background. So with that, we're just going to jump in to Climate Atlas. So Todd, are you seeing the atlas there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Okay, so just looking at the Climate Atlas here, I have on here jurisdictions of protected lands and federal lands. And protected lands are based on USGS, protected GAP 1 and 2 status, and then all federal lands. And if you look, everything is kind of labeled here. So you can kind of zoom in, and just as kind of a base layer, you can see the manager name, the user, or the unit name. And then if it's a protected area, you can see kind of what it is. It's a wilderness study area, and then also the level of protection. So just as a base layer, great kind of background on our public lands in the West. One thing based on feedback from a lot of briefings we've done is to add congressional districts. This allows, again, users and decision makers to know who is the House lead and what kind of congressional district. And then also really important tribal lands, which shows kind of interconnectivity in the West and the tribes in the region. So these are kind of the base layer jurisdictions that are part of the map. So I'm going to show you all 3 distinct regions. We're going to jump into New Mexico first. I'm going to jump up to the Oahu's in Idaho, and then end in Alaska. So first, down to New Mexico. So this region outside of Santa Fe right here, this is called Cajal del Rio. It is a campaign that we're kind of building towards a national monuments campaign. It is a really significant cultural area. It's also outside of Santa Fe. So as far as accessibility, it's a really important region, and one where we potentially see a national monument in the future. So just using the Climate Atlas base layers, I see we have Forest Service acres here and BLM lands. I can use these important management areas. We're going to rename this base layers because I think that's a little bit more straightforward. But I get a sense of BLM ACECs in this region. I can see that there's 2. I get the name and how big they are. And then also US Forest Service inventoried roadless areas. These are areas that meet wilderness quality, but aren't actually protected as wilderness areas. And so you can see within this Cajal del Rio region, we have kind of both of those administrative overlays. And we can also go and look at connectivity factors. If we looked at protected lands, we can see that this region is bordered by the Bandelier Wilderness, which is a gap level 1. So just collecting a lot of baseline information in one place about what's happening on the ground and overlays of administrative protections. Now I'm going to turn most of those off, and we're going to actually look at the important conservation, climate, and biodiversity values in this region. So I'm going to turn this down, and we're going to look at the composite index. And again, the composite index is all of these 6 indicators added up into a single value. So we're going to turn that on. And we see here, this is the Cajal del Rio region. It's relatively high, and higher means that this region has values that are higher than other unprotected landscapes. And so here we see that it's relatively blue, higher composite index, and we could look at any single one of the data layers, which will kind of give us a sense of why this is high. So first, let's look at ecological intactness. This is one of my favorite layers. This kind of shows naturalness, natural state. So here you see Santa Fe, obviously very developed, but right outside of Santa Fe and the Santa Fe airport, you have Cajal del Rio region, which is really undeveloped region. The resolution is great. You can kind of zoom in and see what's happening on the ground. I'm guessing these are trails or dirt roads within this region, but even though it's so close to the city, it is relatively intact. I can look at other things like climate stability. This is going to have a similar climate from today's conditions to future conditions. I can look at total carbon in this region. I'm guessing it's going to be low. This is more of a desert region, but you can see as you move into these forested areas that the carbon gets higher. So again, I can turn on any single one of those layers and kind of see what's happening on the ground. One more aspect of the climate atlas, which I think is pretty cool, is we can add up the amount of carbon stored in above ground and below ground and the soil resources. And this just shows kind of the sequestration of carbon in the ground. And even though these are on the lower scale, there is still sequestration happening in your deserts, in your low desert regions. So I can click on this parcel, and it's going to tell me how many acres are in this small parcel, and then also how many megatons of carbon. And if I want to get a sense of this kind of entire region, hold on, let me try that again. I can click on these various parcels, I can add them up, and then I can see that Cajal del Rio is about 100,000 acres. And there's about 1.15 megatons of carbon. And that's again stored in the soils and the above and below ground biomass. So again, it's just telling me information that I can use as an advocate to make a case for Cajal del Rio.
Danielle, may I interject here? It
Yes.
sounds like there's a momentary pause. There's been a question. Can you help explain, if you know, what is the resolution model or the model resolution of your climate atlas?
No, I cannot. But there's a technical report that goes along with it that Conservation Science Partners prepared that will have all of that information. Again, my background is not a science background. So really this was a partnership between an advocate and a very technical team of PhD scientists that helped make that connection. After this, I can send the technical report out to all of your participants, and they can look through all of that information. If that
why don't we do it this way? Steve, I see your question. I will forward that report to you. So Daniel, just get it to me, and then I can get it out to anyone who wants to see it. I don't think we need to send it out to everybody because they're more. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the Owahis. I know the Owahis is an important region outside of Boise. It's in your backyard, but also to protect as part of a legislative package. We hope that moves forward quickly, showing again some of the base layers and just telling a story about what's happening in the area. This is the Owahis region. We know already that it's made up of various wilderness study areas. So you can see here all the wilderness study areas in the region. We also see here, this is the Malheur Field Office, how many acres. We can get a sense of how much carbon is stored within the above ground, below ground biomass by clicking on that parcel right there. It's a huge, huge parcel, 920,000 acres and almost 12 megatons of carbon. So that again tells a story of what's happening on the ground. What's interesting in this area is we can look at BLM lands with wilderness characteristics. Now, these are lands that have been inventoried as having values of wilderness, but are not protected as such. So you see, we both have wilderness study areas. We have lands with wilderness characteristics. I don't think we have BLM. We have a couple of BLM, small BLM ACECs in this area. What's important in this area, and again, we added all these layers in based on feedback from partners, from BLM and from others, is sage grouse. And we know sage grouse is a huge issue in the Intermountain West. And so sage grouse range covers this entire area. And then we know that sage grouse priority areas are kind of considered essential for long-term protection. And we see that sage grouse priority areas, again, in this kind of Oahe Canyonlands legislative package. So again, it's just having all of this information at your fingertips and being able to tell a story about what's happening on this land. One feature of the climate atlas that I really like is, say I'm looking at this, it kind of looks like a mess, but I want to tell someone, look, I'm looking at sage grouse range priority areas. I want you to look at this map. I can click this share this map feature. It's going to create a link for me. And I can go copy paste that, send it to my friend and say, hey, look at this region outside the Owahis. And it's going to show them exactly what I was looking at. So it's just an easy way for you to share this information with colleagues, with decision makers, is kind of using that tool. Okay, I'm going to show folks two more aspects of the tool. And again, we're going to focus on Idaho because I know that's the headquarters of advocates and maybe where a lot of folks on the phone hail from. If not, everyone knows Idaho is a beautiful state. And right here, we're looking at Idaho, all of the unprotected US Forest Service and BLM lands in the state, which is a lot. There's a lot of potential for conservation in the state of Idaho. Now, by clicking on unprotected Forest Service and BLM lands, this kind of box pops up. And right now on the composite index, if I wanted to see the top 20% of all unprotected US Forest Service and BLM lands based on those 6 indicators for climate and biodiversity, I can click on top 20%. Let's see how many are in Idaho. A lot. There's a lot of top 20%. So what it is telling me is unprotected 70 million acres. And again, this is, west-wide, a lot in Idaho, and that's 6.85 gigatons of carbon. And I can see in Idaho, top 20%, a lot of Forest Service lands, and then some BLM lands down here. Now, if I change what my values are, if I really only care about carbon and climate, I only care about carbon sequestration and kind of climate stability, I want to see the top 20%. It's going to change. No longer are those BLM lands there, but now you get much more of your forested, unprotected forest lands in Idaho. Now, again, say you are biodiversity, you care about biodiversity in the US, and I really want to focus on ecological intactness, connectivity, and perilled species richness. I want to see the top 20% in Idaho. Changes again. Now the top 20% are really these lowland BLM lands that are outside the forest areas. And it makes sense if you look at sage grouse priority areas and the overlay with some of these BLM lands and the sage grouse areas. So again, it's just using all of this information to tell a story about the importance of public lands for climate and biodiversity. So I'm going to show you guys one more region and area, and then we can go to questions. So I think one thing that is unique about this tool also is that we didn't leave out Alaska. And I think in the beginning, we struggled with funding, with how to do that, but we wanted to make sure if we're talking about public lands in the US, we need to include Alaska. So everything we can do in the lower 48 in the West, we can do for public lands in Alaska. So I'm going to show one region that Todd and I are very familiar with, and we've been working on, which is kind of this North Slope region and this Western Arctic region over here. And give me a minute. I'm going to show kind of ecological intactness in this area, because really, let's be honest, there's not much going on up here. There's some villages, but you see this kind of purple over here, that's Prudhoe Bay. So you can see your oil and gas wells and oil and gas fields. And again, this oil and gas wells feature and fields is something that is all throughout the lower 48 too. So you can see Prudhoe Bay, and it's kind of creeping over into this region, which is the Western Arctic. And here's where we have some of the biggest oil and gas development projects that we're kind of fighting right now in the Biden administration. So looking at the Western Arctic and this kind of Teshekbuk Lake area, say we wanted to look at the composite index here. It's not great, which I think might be surprising to some. And if we look at the individual data layers, again, we looked at ecological intactness. It's intact. There's not much going on. Total carbon, it's the tundra. So carbon is really, really high in this region. We know the carbon is stored significantly in tundra. And then if we also look at species richness, you know, this area is prime habitat for caribou. It is also a international recognized bird habitat. Is really important for species. So you wonder why then the composite index doesn't resonate high. It's because if we click on the climate stability data layer, it's because we know that Alaska is facing the impacts of climate change quicker and more significantly than the rest of the US. And so the climate is just not stable here. The tundra is slowly melting. And so that's why the composite index is lower here. So again, we don't want to just use one factor and say composite index tells us the best lands. We kind of can dig into these different data layers to tell a story about what's happening on these public lands. So, with that, with a lot of information, happy to answer any questions. And again, we're really working hard on a front end user-friendly website that will help show how to navigate, how to use this tool, and, you know, really focused on the West. But if you care about the East, all of these data layers are, you know, coast to coast. We wanted comprehensive data layers that really show what's happening and not just kind of state by state. So you can kind of look at total carbon, you can look at ecological intactness and really get a sense of what's happening throughout the lower 48. I think I covered everything, Todd.
Yeah, okay, so
it's a lot of information. And happy to answer any questions.
So there are questions that are coming in, and I will get to them in a moment. But I have a initial question, and that is, when you and your team were conceiving this project, how did you want it to be used? For what purpose? Did you want it to be used by your friends groups in the front end? That is, trying to identify which of the lands in their local landscape that are critical to protect? What was the idea behind it, and how do you hope this is used by the friends groups and other conservation organizations to inform their advocacy?
Yeah. Yes, and it started in my mind because in the Obama administration, they were really concerned with economics. And so every proposal, every legislative proposal, every monuments proposal, we needed to produce an economic report that showed why this land, protecting this landscape would increase this rural economy. And we knew that in a new administration, the focus was going to be climate change and biodiversity. 30 by 30 was already a factor internationally, and we wanted to create something where we didn't have to come up with an individual report every time a landscape, someone wanted to talk about the importance of a landscape. So it was on kind of the front end. As we developed this tool, and with the folks that were the original visionaries, Neil, Nada, and others, we added additional base layers to help even decision makers make valuations on some of the best lands that they should protect, or if they're going through a planning process, to have a better idea of what's happening on the ground. I think even BLM would struggle with knowing, okay, this is my planning area. Where are the ACEC's, lands with wilderness characteristics, wilderness study areas? Where does that all overlap, and how does that interact? Where are places intact? Where are they not? And so even decision makers now, we see this as a tool that they can use to help advance 30 by 30.
Okay, and there's a couple operational questions that I'm just going to try to tick off, or have you tick off, I should say. How will people access this atlas? Is it going to be will there be a fee associated with it? And then third, how will you update it? Will it be updated, or is the data and information in there static at the time that it goes live?
Great questions. No, the whole purpose of this is it's free. We are going to launch it in hopefully a month, and it will be accessible to anyone, anywhere, at any time. No fee associated with it. We'll have a website and you can access the information. How it will be updated. We have a contract ongoing with Conservation Science Partners, so we will continually update this information. For example, congressional districts is going to change. We will change those. And we also want to use this tool to start tracking how the administration is advancing 30 by 30. So when Bears Ears and Grand Staircase get restored, we are going to update those boundaries. Not just that they are now protected, but you are going to be able to toggle this administration's impact on advancing 30 by 30, whether that's GAP 1 and 2, and these are national monuments, or say ACECs with strong protections. We will somehow identify how this administration is both moving forward to advance administrative and kind of permanent protection campaigns, and be able to track that using this tool.
Okay. Richard, I'm going to get to your questions. I'm not forgetting you. I'm just trying to get the easy ones out of the way. I hope you're smiling. Danielle, are private lands included in this climate atlas, or is it just public lands?
It's just public lands, and we've had a lot of questions about including private lands, including more wetlands and water factors. And it wasn't because we were prioritizing one or the other. It was more of a funding and time aspect. This is a baseline product, and I really hope that it's useful for folks. And if they can take this and we can add in kind of the private landowner aspect of it, I think that would be great. We just didn't have the funding or the time to do that now. So we're going to launch with the product we have, but I think this is just the first step. And we're open to working with other entities, other nonprofits focused on other regions to enhance it.
Okay, and great. And so as you continue to develop and roll out version 2.0 and 3.0 informally, of course, you're going to be communicating and conversing with other conservation organizations that may have access to their own impressive data layers, GIS mapping, and all that. So this is
Yes.
This is attempted to be a coordinated effort. CLF started it, but you're willing to take information in from all comers as long as the information meets some kind of baseline for scientific credibility.
Exactly. And I think this data can all be used by other organizations. They can kind of pull this information out and run their own data layers over top. And just so you know, some of these management layers, like lands with wilderness characteristics, those were all pulled from partner organizations. I don't have that information. So we've been really kind of trying to show this to a lot of different entities to get feedback, to make sure we're working in a direction which will help a lot of different groups.
Okay, the questions are coming fast and furious, and I will keep
Love
getting
it.
to them. So I have a proposal on how to roll out 2.0. The question is, climate change is a global phenomenon, as we all know. There's global opportunities and global challenges. Have you thought about, or have any of your partners, funders, or allies thought about adding our friends to the north and friends to the south to this climate atlas, that is Canada and Mexico? Or is that something that somebody has raised as interesting to you, or is it funding limited, or is it limited by other factors, or something you'll think about in the future, but it's too you're focused on 1.0 right now?
Yeah, and again, it's similar to the answer about private lands. Is we really wanted to focus on the opportunity in the US to advance 30 by 30. And if a partner came to us that was focused in Mexico and said, we'd love to add this on to the climate index, we would say, great, let's work together. That's neither our niche nor the funding that we have. And so if we started a project with everything, I think we would just be bogged down. So we're starting with this, but of course we're open to it. It's just a capacity thing.
Right. And so Meta, who asked that question, I think the response to you is it is not within CLF's current thought process, but if you know a bunch of groups that have the capacity, interest, in funding to expand this south or north of the border, they're open to additional partnerships as we continue to, as CLF, I should say, continues to perfect and update this information. All right. I'm going to ask a really detailed question that I don't even understand, but you're going to have it. I'll try to give you a softball. The composite index question.
Yes.
You went over the composite index, and there is some confusion about what the resolution and the ability of that composite index to differentiate on a landscape by landscape level. The question is, the area immediately around Gold Beach, Oregon has a very low score. Do you happen to know where Gold Beach, Oregon is?
Oh God,
Danielle?
I don't know.
So Yancey, if you would throw into your
I'm guessing it's this lower
question.
section.
The question is, Gold Beach, Oregon has a very low score while the rest of Oregon coast is high. The carbon and climate layer appears to be inaccurate because there's no dramatic change in forest between these two areas. So I'm not sure, Yancey, that we can take that question on right now, but what I'll do in the absence of more information, but what I'll do is if you want to shoot me an email and I can put you, and I can try to help us through this question.
Yeah.
That might be the way to handle it. Let's see. All right, a couple more questions here. Richard, you've been waiting patiently. I'm going to take your question, and I will repeat it for everybody so they can understand the answer. The question is, and of course, Richard is quite right. Many BLM and Forest Service lands with legal protection designations are not being adequately protected on the ground. The management cultures are often hostile to conservation. Richard, of course, worked for 15 years in BLM and trying to protect the landscapes of the American West for far longer than that. For this database, Danielle, how do you vet whether and if federal lands for protection are actually being protected?
Yes. So this database is not going to cover that. And I completely agree, Richard. It is an issue, especially with BLM. But it is something that, we can't tackle everything here. Here we're trying to advance 30 by 30. And I think there is a whole set of other coalitions, partners, tools that we're using to try to advance the lines on the map while making the lines on the map more meaningful. And so I get, this is about lines on a map. There's still a lot of work to be done with what happens inside those lines. We can't tackle all of that here, but we are trying to, in different means, different coalitions, also have tackle that issue at the same time. But I get it.
And I will just affirm and amplify Danielle response, and Richard, your initial observation. Of course, areas that are protected on a map does not translate always to good implementation level decisions. There's no doubt about it. The Northern Corridor Highway through the Red Cliffs National Conservation Area is the perfect example. Where an area can, on this map, come up as protected, but yet an adverse president and administration tries to run a 4-lane highway through it. So I hear you. That is a operational difficulty that we have and an implementation level difficulty. But I'm not sure that any mapping, any data analysis can capture that. But great question, Richard, and of course you're right. Okay, keeping going. Will the climate atlas be accessible on a mobile platform, Danielle?
That is a good question. I don't know.
Ashton, you win.
You win.
For the most difficult answer and interesting question.
I will find out. I'm not sure. The front website will be the atlas. I'm just not sure how the functionality, but I will check. That's a good question.
Okay, so we don't know. It would seem to be a difficult task looking at this, looking what we're looking at on the computer screen on a 3.5 or 4.5 inch screen. But folks can reach out to me. Ashton, you can reach out to me, and when Danielle does the same, I can circle back with you. Okay, a couple more questions. We're at about the 52-minute mark. There's been some observations, Danielle, from folks that watch this presentation, that incorporating and including state-based jurisdictional protections would help give a more comprehensive picture. For example, Washington Department of Natural Resources lands that have some level of protections. You may want to consider in 2.0 or 3.0 incorporating state lands that have protection to give a more comprehensive analysis of the landscapes out there. Do you have any thoughts on that, or have you heard any has anybody else raised that, or are you thinking about that as you move forward?
I mean, I think that's a great point. You know, another thing that we've heard a lot, just to add to the list, to my list, is corridors, which has been a tough one because usually all that information is state by state based. And so that's been a tough one too. To date, we've tried to take data that is more comprehensive in scope, but I think there are opportunities in the future to kind of focus down on some of these other data layers, especially the kind of state lands ones when you come to like fish and game and maybe some of these other data layers based on states. Yeah,
and exactly. And Steve notes that Washington Department of Natural Resources has about 2 million acres of lands under its control, and because the America the Beautiful project and program, that is a 30 by 30 initiative, is looking at all types of different lands to add to the 30 by 30, it might make sense in 2.0 or 3.0 to start incorporating some of these lands in the climate atlas. Thanks, Steve. Great questions. I have a question from Ben, who's so smart I could barely read his question, but I'm going to give it a go, Ben. Ben is a energy associate or energy director for Idaho Conservation League, who's been doing remarkable work for the past 10 or 15 years here in Idaho. And his question is, he'd like to use this tool to assess energy infrastructure proposals on federal lands, because they are, as you know, Danielle, and I know, they're coming fast and furious. It's a tough one, but do you have thoughts, Danielle, on how to use this tool to identify lands with lower environmental conflict? So what Ben is asking is there a way that he could use this model when he sees a project coming out in the early comment stage? Is there a way that he can use the model to inform himself and his constituents on the ecological impacts of the lands that are targeted? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's almost like, I've never thought of that, but it's almost the inverse of what we've been looking at. You can use these layers if you want to look at kind of ecological intactness, and use it the opposite. Look for areas that are already impacted by human use. Look at places that, you know, ecological connectivity is low. Look at places that aren't already lands with wilderness characteristics, or ACECs, or, you know, other things. So you could almost use the reverse of this, right? Look at areas that have low total carbon sequestration, because you know you're going to impact those areas. And so I think, yes, I think you just use the tool in the reverse fashion.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what I thought. Ben, if that doesn't make sense to you in one way or another, you want to continue this conversation, because I know have been essential to the advocacy here in Idaho on the energy front. If you want to circle with Danielle and you have any further questions, reach out to me and I can put you two in touch. I suspect you'll be fast friends before too long. Richard is letting go with his questions, and I'm going to get to them to the extent that I can, Richard. So there's a question out there from Tom Butine, who I don't know very well, and I don't recognize the name, but his question is, how could local, kind of building on Richard's observation, which is protection on the ground, protection on paper doesn't mean protection on the ground. As I think Tom's point is, as you're thinking about implementation and execution on this, of the Climate Atlas down the road, 2.0, 3.0, there may be some, and Tom has expressed some desire to have local groups providing input on this so-called protection level, you know, protected lands, because maybe there's a hatched purple for lands that are protected on paper but not on the ground. So there's just we're now seeing it from both Tom and Richard, a desire to bring real world impacts and implementation decisions into the Climate Atlas.
Yes.
At some later stage of development. Great observation, Tom. This has been a sticking point for 20 years, not just with the Climate Atlas. It's been a sticking point. Anytime one group wants to put up a success, we win because there's a wilderness area designated. There's always somebody saying, well, wilderness doesn't solve it because you can mine in wilderness if it's another activity. So I hear you, and we're not going to solve that debate today, but I like the fact that you've raised it again. So thank you for doing that. Let me see, we got a couple more questions. Everyone, if you have further questions of Danielle or me, Amy was kind enough to give everybody my email. So if I get spams, I'll direct those to Amy. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm not great on email, but I will get back to you as quickly as I can, and I will not forget you. Let's see, last question.
I'm trying to look at them too.
So there, and Richard made another interesting observation. Is there a way to link on the Climate Atlas the BLM's NEPA log / NEPA website, so there can be an overlay of decisions that BLM is proposing to issue, so you can kind of see what is targeted or threatened with some kind of vegetation management road, what have you. Really interesting observation, Richard, and it would help. Just looking at it from a impact perspective, it would help to see what areas are immediately threatened in the future. Just an observation. I'll let you answer if you want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. And Richard, I think that's maybe too broad and specific, but that concept is something that we are considering in kind of the next phase, is to be able to upload your own boundary layer on this tool. So whether it is a specific planning area, or you're looking at a national monument, or whatever your specific boundary that you care about, your planning area, you can upload that to this tool and have a more specific set of indices kind of shown through that boundary. So yes, we're working on how that functionality would work. to have individuals be able to do that.
Okay, we have answered 16 questions. We are at about 6:51. We're going to wrap this up. I'm going to hand this back. Well, first of all, Danielle, as expected, your presentation was exquisite, super interesting, amazing technology that you're pulling together. Thank you for putting this forward. I actually look forward to see how we can operationalize this information to both inform our advocacy and, frankly, because I'm a litigator, inform our litigation. There is litigation doesn't start when you enter the courtroom, as everybody knows. Litigation starts, like on behalf of Conserve Southwest Utah, starts years ahead when you engage in the administrative process. There will be ample opportunities to use the Climate Atlas to inform our advocacy at the administrative stage, which will then inform our advocacy and be in front of the court at the litigation stage. That is going to be really, really impressive stuff. And I look forward to kind of operationalizing your intelligence and your understanding and helping move conservation forward. With that, thanks again, Danielle. I'm going to hand it off to Amy because she's the boss and she told me I had to wrap up.
That's how it goes. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. Danielle, it's been a real pleasure to have you with us tonight. Todd, thanks for being such an excellent facilitator. Really just fascinating, and to think about the potential of all this data and what kind of good use it could be put to. Really, really excellent. And I'm glad to have so many of our conservation partners plugged in with us this evening, because I imagine it's just, sparking interest and really imagination about what we can do and how we can put this to good use. So thank you. Thank you to all of you out there who joined us this evening. We really appreciate that you gave us your Wednesday evening and hung out with us on our Voices for the West. Don't forget to tune in for next month's October edition with Betsy Quammen, the author, who will talk about her newest book about radicalization of the American West. We have the date and the details of that yet forthcoming. We're hoping to do a hybrid indoor-outdoor event next month for folks that are in the Boise area. We're hoping to find a safe outdoor venue where we might also be able to do a live remote for folks who are not right down the street from us. So stay tuned for that. I will remind folks that Advocates for the West and Conservation Lands Foundation are able to do all of the good, important work that we do, thanks to the generosity of individuals like all of you who are with us tonight, and like all of us on the staff too, who care about the American West and show that not just through our good work, but also through our dollars. So if you feel inspired this evening, I hope that you will make a gift to Advocates for the West or Conservation Lands Foundation, or both. Why not? And feel free to ping Todd or Danielle with any questions. Again, it was a pleasure. Anna, we're thinking about you in Athens, Greece tonight. And good night, everybody.
Bye.